be able to ask their burning questions. Welcome everyone, thanks for coming. The education team, which consists of Chelsea, Cat Wolf, Jody is our fearless leader, Kristy's on it, Troy, and Jonathan Velez, and me. We've all been thinking about how hard it is to get a job in this economy, just kidding, in this academic climate. And so we thought that the best way would be to educate you on the process and to provide you some of the greatest knowledge available on both sides of the application, from people who just got their assistant professor jobs or just got tenure-track associate jobs, or those people that have been interviewing people for a long time. And then we also wanted to take a look at your application documents and talk about how to make yourself look better on paper, because you have developed or invested a considerable amount of time in the interdisciplinary aspect, and we want that to count for you even if you go to a disciplinary position. So I just wanted to introduce our panelists today. I'll start at the end with Paul. Paul is the director of the Northwest Knowledge Network and is a lead scientist on EPSCoR. He started as a soil scientist, so some of you might feel at ease knowing that, and then has gone all in on the geospatial and the technology and really let his nerd show. And I'm sure he'll be able to share with you what it means to be on different panels or on different search committees. Am I missing anything else? He's Australian.
Yeah.
Half.
Half Australian. Without an Australian accent.
So we're glad to have his expertise here. Let's see. Making sure I got all my papers mixed up. Next to Paul is Ian von Lindern, who we're glad to have from the business sector, someone who turned their PhD into something economically valuable, perhaps. He holds a PhD in environmental science and engineering, as well as a professional engineering certificate, and started the TerraGraphics environmental engineering consulting group. Is that what we call it? Where he is the chief executive officer and principal scientist. And anyone who has gone biking on the Trail of the Coeur d'Alenes, Ian had a hand in that, as he recovered that from a Superfund site into a recreational Superfund site.
Super fun.
Super fun! Thank you. And then from WSU, we have Dr. Jennifer Adam, who holds a PhD in civil engineering and a special interest in snowmelt. And I was looking at your publications and I was amazed at the array, from the geophysical research to Journal of Climate, and it just seems like you've had a way of making engineering even more practical. You're also the lead scientist for BioEarth, that's correct. And we have several BioEarth students. And then you have a connection to, what is it, Wisdom? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Great. And then we all know and love Kristy Borrelli, our extension specialist. Kristy turned her farming experience growing up into a passion for organic agriculture that she studied as a master's and PhD student at Washington State. And now she's turning all these ideas into technology and useful resources for producers. Some call her the face of REACH, and I'm just excited to hear how you translated yourself into this interdisciplinary scientist by necessity. So the format of this is we have some set questions to kind of take you through the process of the applications, but please feel free to jump in and ask your own questions at any time, because we want this to be the most useful to you. And we're starting with the panelists. We'll get to know everybody in here better. I mean, most of you know each other, but after the panelists, because they have a short time window to get your burning questions in. Did anyone want to start with opening comments as to how they got their positions and started from a disciplinary PhD into this interdisciplinary world that you're working in? Jenny was nodding.
Oh, okay. I have to say, I did not jump in, I was not really that involved in interdisciplinary research as a student. It was pretty disciplinary, pretty focused on snow melt, like you say, which I don't do a lot of anymore, and then a lot of work with Arctic hydrology and things like that, and pretty much kind of doing my own thing. And when I wrote up my application, I mentioned, basically I was interested in interdisciplinary research, and I mentioned the kinds of projects I could go after, the kind of people I could work with, but it was really, the application was extremely disciplinary focused. It was after I came to WSU that I started to realize that I wanted to shift away from trying to understand, assess the problem of climate change and water resources. You know, I think you're all familiar with warming impacts on our snowpack processes and how that shifts our water availability away from our summer season of highest demand into a season where we don't need it as much. And I had done a lot of work assessing, kind of understanding that problem. And when I came to WSU and really, you know, at a land-grant university, started to realize that I wanted to shift my career towards solving our problems rather than just characterizing our problems. And that's when I really took a route towards an interdisciplinarity and got much more into looking at agriculture, which is our #1 consumptive use, of course, in the area, in the Columbia River Basin, which is where I focus my areas, and started looking for collaborators. For the first several years at WSU, I was sort of floating around because you know, if you looked at my research description of my application, it was very, very narrow, very focused. And I realized that if I stay there, I'm not going to be able to really work on solving these problems. So for the first few years, I wasn't really sure who my collaborators were, and over time, it just, you know, kind of find the kind of people that you can work with. I think a lot of interdisciplinary research has to do with finding people that you really, you know, that really, both personality and expertise fits and intersects well with your own area. So my moving over towards this interdisciplinary research had to do with just my own interest in trying to work on solving problems, and I've gotten away from that. But I have also reviewed a lot of applications for people who have erred on both sides of being too disciplinary and also erred on the side of being too interdisciplinary.
Great.
I'm happy to weigh in. I guess my career, not necessarily by design, but it's been fairly interdisciplinary right from the beginning. I got a bachelor's degree in soil science, a master's degree in remote sensing, and then a PhD degree in environmental modeling. And for me, it was kind of a building on the skills and knowledge through time. And then I worked for CSIRO, Division of Land and Water in Australia for about 7 years. And then came back and did a postdoc at UC Santa Barbara before I came to the U of I in 1997. So I'm on my 18th year now at the U of I. And I guess looking back over my time at the U of I, I've also been on, I think, close to 20 different search committees. I think I've been a part of the hiring of 2/3 of my department that I sit in right now. And actually, I'm currently on a search committee that is an EPSCoR position, that is an interdisciplinary position that's going in. The tenure home will be in computer science, but the position is an interoperability faculty hire. And so the expertise that this person is expected to have is really to help us be able to utilize the different types of data sets that are being developed by different disciplines and how we actually develop tools that enable us to bring those data sets together, because I think really when it comes down to the nuts and bolts of interdisciplinary research, a lot of it relates back to the basic data sets that are being developed and how you explore and utilize those data sets to ask and answer questions. And so for me, I've kind of had my own natural curiosity kind of draw me through, and so I started out as a soil scientist, and I've always kind of had a foot in continuing to do some soils research. When I joined the University of Idaho, I came here as a professor of remote sensing and geospatial ecology, so for me it was a little bit of a step into a different direction, and I think, again, for myself, it was stimulating because of the fact that I was working really across a range of disciplines. Remote sensing is really a set of tools that can support a variety of different disciplines for different purposes. My research early on had a focus on characterizing forests, forest health, being able to map forest productivity across the landscape, using different remote sensing tools to help aid that process. And then more recently, another element of my career really all the way through was that I was always working with large data sets and probably always complaining about the lack of basic cyber infrastructure to assist us in doing research. And I think through the aspect of complaining a lot, I'm now the director of the Northwest Knowledge Network, which is a research support unit out of the Office of Research that is aimed at supporting large research projects, and the REACCH project is one of the primary projects that we support. We provide a lot of the background servers, the tools for application development. So Ed is one of my PhD students, and I work very closely with Eric. We kind of operate as a team to support all the disciplinary work that's going on within REACCH. But that's just a kind of a quick nutshell on my interdisciplinary background. So I'll let someone else add in there.
I'll go. So I think I've always been interdisciplinary. I've never thought myself as a subject specialist, even though you kind of partition that way in graduate school. And I guess the reason, I'm very systematic in my thinking, and I like to think of pieces of things and how they pull together. And then kind of in that regard, especially with respect to science, like how does it get into the hands of the users? So the education part of science, like science can get too specific or too focused, and it doesn't really allow non-scientists or people who are outside of a discipline to really have ownership of it. And when we're talking about food systems, when we're talking about environments, they absolutely have ownership of it. And so that's really, I guess, my passion, my base of going into science, is to really get that outreach out there. And kind of in that regard too, is I never really thought of my strengths. I never thought of myself as having this cutting edge scientific breakthroughs, right? So I have other strengths instead, and so I try to focus on those and what makes me unique. I have a farming background. I grew up on a farm. I know how to talk to growers. I loved school and I loved working with students, and so I kind of pull in those as well as my science background to strengthen everything. So yeah, I guess that would be just kind of think of yourself of how you're unique and how interdisciplinary research can enhance what you really want to do beyond science to really put it in the hands of users.
So I grew up on a farm in southern Idaho, too. And I milked cows all the way through high school, and I couldn't get away fast enough. So I went to engineering school because they told me I'd make the most money in 4 years if I was an engineer. I got a job, and I absolutely hated it. It was in a factory, rained tar out of the sky, pollution was awful. And I was very fortunate. I went back to school, and I was in one of the first interdisciplinary PhD programs in the country 40 years ago at the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies. And I did a PhD that was called interdisciplinary. When I came out of there, I found it almost impossible to get a job because no one understood this. And I can tell a few stories on this university. One of the deans I was interviewed with actually said to me, "How are you ever going to get a job with this degree? Maybe you could get a job as a congressional investigator or something, but I don't see how you can ever really use this in the real world." head of the chemistry department told me, I don't know why you did this, because we teach all this in chemistry. So at that time, no one understood interdisciplinary. That has changed greatly. I think you're actually reversed now. You're at an advantage coming out with an interdisciplinary degree. I started a company probably 50% because I couldn't find a job. And it's the best thing that ever happened to me. I probably hired 1,000 people in the last 30 years. I've probably interviewed 200 or 300 of them. I know a lot about interviews now. I really sucked when I was interviewing. I could tell you that now, knowing that. But your future is good. And I do some work with the United Nations, and they indicate that there's going to be a 50-fold increase in disasters worldwide in the next 25 years. And those are the combination of urbanization and climate change coming together at cities and infrastructure around the world is not going to be able to respond to these new situations, and there are going to need to be solutions to these problems that have to be interdisciplinary. And I think you're going to be well prepared for that. It's much different than it was 40 years ago. The world is ready to deal with interdisciplinary folks. You're going to find when you move out there that probably the narrowest minds are still in the universities. Many academics, they've spent a career being so focused that they don't see the spaces between their disciplines. Even today, that's true. Business has discovered quite the opposite. And there are ways that you can sell yourself in that world. I hope we can get to a few of those.
Yeah?
One of you mentioned about how you had interviewed somebody who was too far into the interdisciplinary. Could you talk about
I knew that
how
would get the question.
too far in?
Yeah, we had somebody apply for, so now, in our college, WSU in general is really pushing the interdisciplinary, and I totally agree that there are a lot of people around that really are pushing against it, but there's fortunately, the momentum is forward that it's kind of laying out the few people who are still really ivory towers and can't see beyond those connections, but nevertheless, we had somebody who came in and interviewed, and it was to the point of scattered, and so that's where it gets weak. And so I think you can, and I really liked what people are saying here, because on the one hand, you can identify yourself as a linkage person, but you have to develop that as your strength and really show how you have developed this discipline in and of itself of integrating around some key issues. And so the person that came in and was recommended by the committee as the hire, the dean had turned it around and said, no, it's way too scattered, we don't see a disciplinary focus here. And that could be particularly an engineering phenomenon, I don't know, but what happens is that if you cannot show that you have a certain amount of fundamental knowledge in your application material, then you're going to seem too scattered. So you have to go show that fundamental knowledge, and you have to tie together everything that you're working in, and show how you act, how not only do you have your deep fundamentals and your skills and your technical ways you can handle things, but at the same time, your area of emphasis, your discipline in a sense, is in integrating, and that you can use those two things. You know, we talk about the T, right? have you heard the T? We talk about this a lot with our Inspire program. Disciplinary focus, you have to have the depth, but at the same time on the top, you really need to have the width. And so what you want to do is like have a shallower understanding of a broad array of disciplines, but somewhere you have to show proficiency, technical proficiency and fundamental understanding in at least one area. And I saw a new article that's been floating around, but it's actually more of a, what is it?
Pie shape.
A pie shaped, yeah, where one is your, what is it, Sarah? One is your disciplinary emphasis and the other is cyber computing or
Yeah, or
VR.
like statistical
Yeah,
ability to deal with whatever data sets
right.
you're
So now we have to have our ability to manipulate data and use statistics but have a disciplinary and still be able to have a shallow understanding of a broad array of topics in order to excel ourselves. So if you do go the interdisciplinary route, just know that, and that's great. I think this is the time to show at a lot of universities, or really, I mean, we're not even bringing people in for interviews if they don't have some, at least, interest in working in an interdisciplinary setting. But just make sure that you don't come across scattered and make sure you really bring forward and show that you do have technical proficiency. And so like your job talk could be like how you write a proposal or how you write your paper or your dissertation, where you have a martini glass or an hourglass, where you start really big picture. Always start with the societal grand challenges every time. If you start too narrow with your overall area that you're kind of looking at, then that right away is showing that you're too narrow. So start really big picture, so that show the societal grand challenge, then starting getting zero in, right? Then come back out again at the end and show how you're connecting and how you're really, kind of using, maybe you not yourself, but how you within a larger team or in 10 years from now, or 20 years from now, how you're eventually going to use all these things to start attacking societal challenges, or how other people can use these things to attack societal challenges. And that's what this person did was he had a whole bunch of little pillars, but he didn't integrate them at all. He really didn't show a rich, strong depth anywhere in one area.
Being interdisciplinary doesn't mean you're not rigorous.
Yes.
You have to demonstrate rigor in what you're doing. You have to demonstrate that you can write. You have to demonstrate that you have quantitative skills. And then the challenges that you take on in an interdisciplinary area are actually more challenging than those within the disciplines. And that's what you need to demonstrate to folks. When you interview, everyone has a different idea of what interdisciplinary means. And it means something different for everyone. So you have to define that. You need to bring across to who you're interviewing with what it meant for you. And if you're at the master's and PhD level, you need to demonstrate that you have mastered the subject, you've been able to contribute to it, and you've been able to communicate that through your thesis activities, and emphasize rigor. Interdisciplinary does not mean soft, and that's up to you to demonstrate that you didn't do rigorous.
I think it's almost more sophisticated in being able to demonstrate your interdisciplinary within your subject knowledge, because it does show that you have this skill, this in-depth skill, and then you can bring it to the outside world and to real life challenges. And I think if you can do that in your application materials and your interviews, and when you're giving who's ever interviewing you a glimpse of what your skills are too, and thinking of your subject area and your context.
And then you said an important point. You must work with other people. You have to work with other disciplines. You're not going to know everything you need to know with every discipline. And you have to work there, but those are people. So you have to work with people. And you want to be able to emphasize that you can work with teams, you can work with diverse people. You're not going to like every one of them. And you're going to be in conflict at times. But you need to resolve those conflicts so you can be a team worker, but also demonstrate that you can stand up for yourself as a team, and you can work out problems with with other folks. Employers look for that a lot nowadays.
I have a question. So I'm in this situation right now, making the jump from the final year of your PhD, you're looking for postdoc opportunities or, first job out of your PhD opportunities. And I'm trying to stay in a certain place, so I'm broadening my search a little bit beyond my focus area. And I'm just wondering if you guys could all talk about, I don't know, I guess what you've seen or what your opinions are about branching off from your dissertation topic or your grad school focus.
So I'm in a similar situation right now. I have my life doesn't allow me to move wherever I want, when I want. I think that's something that got presented to us as scientists. Like, you just got to go where the jobs are. If you want to be a soil scientist, if you're in soil fertility, you go wherever. It doesn't matter where you go. And I don't think that's true at all. I mean, you're going to hear a lot of things as you're applying for jobs and doing all this stuff that you have to do this thing or this is one way of doing it. And I think that's one of the most important things I've learned, that you do have other aspects in your life that are equally or more important. So it's cool to balance those and you don't have to do anything. But I found that working with interdisciplinary, having a different perspective on things, because I'm limiting where I can be, it has been extremely helpful because you are limited. And I mean, if you're focusing just on the land-grant colleges, you have an option of 50 jobs, and then you take out half those states because you don't want to limit it, you know what I mean? So you get very narrow. And I actually did find an application the other day that was for natural resources, and I looked at it, and it was a teaching college, and I could see different ways, like, oh, I could connect that because I had these skills, So I don't know if I answered your question entirely, Sarah, but I think it is possible, and I really found it helpful just to think outside of yourself. And again, I think kind of what Jenny said earlier about resynthesizing what your work is into this other job. And you have to do that for any application anyways. It's all specific. No two soil science jobs or any of them are the same, and so you have to look in the context of it. But I found it extremely helpful being limited with where I can move and when I can move to be able to work in these other areas. So is that enough?
I might add on to that. I think there are things that you can do too to increase your chances. I think it was mentioned here that interdisciplinary means different things to different people, and believe me, it does. And when you're on a search committee, there can be a lot of interesting discussions behind the scenes because we don't all agree, and we all tend to come at it from different perspectives. And so one of the things that you can do is learn about who's on the search committee.
Right.
A lot of times you can inquire about that and at least get the names of the people that are on the search committee. And then you can do your own research about the work that they've done, what kinds of interdisciplinary things they've been involved with. And then I think, much like what Kristy said, you can begin to market yourself thinking about the skills that you've got and how you can write your application, and if you get past that step, how you can do the interview based on doing a lot of your own research, because I'm on a lot of search committees, and it continually amazes me at how little research the applicants have done about the institution or the group that are serving on the search committee that are going to be the ones judging whether you make it through that pool or not.
Yeah. So I guess that's another way to ask the question, which is like, if you're on the search committee, is that going to be, a red flag or just putting me in the no pile if I'm applying for a job that wants a degree that's not like the title of my degree? So like for example, like an air quality job versus whatever I'm doing now, like greenhouse gases and.
I think initially you want to look very closely at what the minimum qualifications are for a job.
Yeah.
Because typically that's where the first cut happens. And a lot of times they're looking for a degree with a specific name that is an indicator that you do have disciplinary depth in an area that's related to that position. So it pays to really look at the description of the job, and for you to put some thought into whether you feel like you can market yourself to fit into that, the way that that's been laid out.
Yeah, that or similar.
Right.
Or similar degree
Yeah.
area.
Well, a lot of times, the first initial cut, we go through and we look at the minimum qualifications, and if you're ranking very low, you'll basically get moved off the list right at that point. And so, you can possibly save yourself some time by trying to understand whether you meet those minimum qualifications. And, even if you're on the edge, if there's a way that you can market yourself to demonstrate that you do have the skills that can fit into that position. And, I just think that little bit of research right at the get-go of trying to look for a job can help you quite a bit.
Well, I'm thinking about one of the things that you said about your job, how you moved into this remote sensing as a tool, and I'm thinking about how Sarah and some of her lab mates have developed these tools. Basically, they're the only ones that can do this kind of micro analysis of the composition of the air, and I wonder how can you work in this leadership and tools into an application to make it, to bolster it.
Well, I think again, if you can in your application letter build on that strength that you have and how those tools could be used in the realm of what the position is about, you're going to increase your chances quite a bit about moving on within that search committee. And then, there's different things that I think are important depending upon which step you're at. If you're actually to the interview step, then it's really about being able to communicate and talk on your feet, and actually interact with the people and give them a feeling that you would be a good member of their team. And so you can talk about the specific tools that you've got, but if you can relate it to, elements that would be a part of that position, I think you're gonna boost yourself ahead quite a bit.
Jenny, were you going to add something?
Oh, I was just going to add that as far as, if you do go and get a postdoc and it's, while it uses some of your skill sets or tools or whatever and towards different applications, that's not necessarily a bad thing when you later apply for a tenure-track position, because it shows that you're adaptable and flexible, which we really are looking for with people in tenure-track. You're not going to come in and be the reproduction of your thesis advisor, right? You have to go out and be able to work and adapt not only to the people around you, the kinds of problems that they're working on and fit into a team, but you have to adapt to the funding environment. You have to adapt to the fact that our issues, our societal challenges are changing, and that you're ready to hit those and use your skill set to hit those. And so, that's basically what I had done. My skill set is in spatially distributed process-based models. So I use these types of models, right? And so now we're using the same models to look at all kinds of different things, like agriculture. I don't know anything about cropping systems. At least I didn't. And so you can certainly fit yourself into areas that you never would have dreamed of just by having this consistency in the tools that you're using. So yeah, I agree entirely with what Kristy and Paul are saying.
And I'd say on the private side, if you are selling yourself as an interdisciplinary person, you are going to do 20 or 30 projects in your career that you cannot predict right now and are going to have less and less to do with your thesis as you progress. They're going to have to do with how you succeed and move from one success to another. People that interview you are going to be looking for that potential. There's a great point made here. All your resume for is to get you in the interview.
Right.
And you should really structure that. Great point to know a lot about the organization that you're interviewing with. Learn as much as you can. Take as many interviews as you can. Nobody had more failure interviews. Pretty sure of that. But you learn from each of those, and you learn something about yourself. But the important thing is people are going to be looking for your ability to solve problems. And that takes dealing with people, working in teams, having the tools, and having accomplished something before. So I think largely if you were interviewing with consulting firms, they're not going to be looking specifically what you did. They're going to be looking at how you did that and how successful you were doing that and how they can apply that capability in their own activity. You should certainly show flexibility. For example, we usually hired at a half a person. We would push our own staff to 120% as long as we could till we wouldn't take it anymore, and then we'd have to hire to relieve their load during the growth period. And we would hire, we would be able to handle a half a person, but we had to give you another half a person. So half the interview was about what else can you do, what else are you willing to do.
Oh, I see what you mean.
It's important to show that.
Maybe you all could speak to what you're looking for when you're hiring someone, or how you presented yourself. Say, because we'll work on the print application aspect a little bit later, but once people get in the door or on the phone, can we talk about the in-person aspects that you're looking for in someone, and how they present themselves? Their arms like this, or at the interview. Or how did you present yourself recently?
Yeah, so I've only been on the application end, the application and interview end, so I can't really speak from the search committee. Hopefully these guys can add in, but I think, yeah, just showing yourself as a well-rounded person. Writing applications is intensive. If you've never done it before, you're probably going to want to start early. I mean, there's all these documents in there that I just had no idea. And a lot of times you're like, oh, this is the perfect job, and the deadline is a week away, you know. So it is good to start looking, and even if you're not ready to apply, just start looking to see what's out there, and that'll help you identify some of these things of like interdisciplinary opportunities, and just see, oh, well, look at how different this job is than this job. But when you're writing applications, you do want to spend some time ahead of time. You have to write a research statement, depending on the position, a research statement, a teaching statement, and or an extension statement. Those are usually 2-page documents, and along with your other materials, you basically prepare a packet that takes some time.
Future research, your CV, and a few other documents we'll go over later. But I'm not a panelist, but I spent close to 100 hours on applications this year.
I think I spent 2 weeks on my materials, the first application I applied for, you know, the first job I applied for. Yeah, and I mean, that's not an exaggeration. And now I have those, and they're helpful, but every time you apply for a job, you do have to adapt them. So there is a significant amount of homework you have to do. Phone interviews for everything I've applied for has been academic. I've had one phone interview, only one, and I don't know if that's a newer way of doing it, but I haven't had many phone interviews. When I did have one, it was awkward, as you can imagine. As fun as it is being grilled by a group of people you can't see, or see interactions all on mute. So phone interviews, not a favorite. And then the in-person interviews, I think just show yourself, like be yourself, be confident, show you have ownership of your project, of your ideas, be excited about it. If you haven't gone to any faculty interviews or any interviews that you, especially faculty ones, just start going to them even if they're not in your subject area. When I went to my first interview, I wasn't surprised because it's a 2 to 3 day marathon. I had one interview that was 3 days long, and you're on the whole time. Usually you do 2 presentations depending on the position. 2 hour long, and you're constantly interacting. But when I went, I wasn't surprised. I was like, oh, of course, this is how it is, because I had been to several faculty interviews before I had gone. So I highly recommend just being a fly on the wall with those, even just if you make it to the research seminars.
I think somebody mentioned, one of the big things is be really, really prepared for knowing about the institution, the people that you're going to interview with, because that's been one of the major things that I've seen in weaknesses is they haven't done their groundwork in terms of understanding who's there, what we do, what our strengths are, and even before the phone interview, know these things. And we always ask in our phone interviews, how do you think you're going to fit in with our program? And by and large, there's a lull because they haven't researched us. They don't know how they fit in because they haven't looked into who we are. And some other just unprepared, like the amount of time it takes to prepare for every piece of this is huge. So and they have to be really, just no typos, the competition for these jobs is so intense that if you have one grammar mistake, especially in a cover letter, the cover letter is going to be your most important piece of your application. And, you know, if you don't spend a lot of time on your cover letter, you're going to get, you know, we're not going to even spend that much time looking at your CV really. And, you know, I had one person who interviewed in my department had shown one of my graphics in the interview, and then later it became very clear that he didn't realize this was my paper that he was signing here and showing graphics. So he was a little bit, he insulted my thesis advisor. So just that part of that is that, remember, every single part of that 2 to 3 days is an interview. So when you go out to dinner, or you think you've already done your oral and you feel like everything's done, and you go out, you know, for the last beer before you get on the airplane or whatever, you're still in the interview and you can blow it then. Just like that, you can blow it. So don't let off your guard. But
They do have etiquette dinners through the Career Center, so you don't eat like an animal.
I just wanted to add one thing, because we keep saying related back to the university, do your homework on the university or the institution you're applying for, but also grants are a huge one, and that's what comes up. I mean, it's not uncommon. What's the first grant you're going to apply for when you get this job? So certainly do research about your grants before you go on the interview.
I think knowing the granting bodies as well, a lot of times we'll ask questions about, you know, where would you look for grants for your own research program? And a lot of times people haven't thought about that, or they haven't had a lot of experience. In one of the telephone interviews we did last week, the first question we asked the person why they wanted to come to the U of I, and he started talking about how he was so excited about working with the people in the med school at the U of I. We don't have a med school.
Did you think it was
And
Iowa or
so,
what?
and so the whole rest of the search committee, we all kind of, at that point, we sort of went like this, and we went through the rest of the questions, but it kind of cast the whole pall over the rest of that interview. And I think when you get to the point of an in-person interview, you have to keep your energy up. And I think like what a couple of people have mentioned, it is a marathon, and you're going to answer the same questions with different people over and over again, and you have to be prepared to kind of keep your enthusiasm level up. And you have to come in, I think, with a positive and an engaging perspective on things, and you have to be adaptable. You have to be willing to talk almost about any subject that the people that you're interviewing with might want to talk about. So you kind of have to be ready to step outside your comfort zone a little bit when you're doing that. And so, again, I think that idea of trying to do research about the group and the university where you're going, and the department or the college that you're going into, understanding what facilities are there already and how you might contribute or help to build that, are all things that would really kind of rise you above the rest of the candidates that are coming in and interviewing.
Okay, so I have a question that is, I don't know if it's exactly fits into this, but I have a spouse who has a faculty position. So how is that, from an academic perspective, you're applying for an academic position? Have you guys had that experience, the traveling spouse? When do you mention that? Is that something you don't mention? Is it you mentioned it in the beginning? Do you guys have any thoughts on that, or I don't know?
So she already has a job?
She already has a job, so I'm working on my PhD. But she has a position, so you know.
Spousal accommodation?
Yeah, exactly. So I'm just wondering, like, is that something where in the future I'm applying for some job? Is that like, do you guys perspective on not saying anything?
I'll give you my opinion. I think, first of all, you're trying to sell yourself into that position. It has nothing to do with your spouse. And typically, you want to go through that process based upon what you're interested in and how you can get into that position. Usually it's when you get to the point of perhaps being offered the job or negotiating with either the department head or the dean, that the issues of spousal accommodation would typically come into the discussion. And so I would not bring that in right in the very beginning. I think you need to kind of get yourself over the first humps of getting to the short list and getting invited to the interview first, because that's kind of a distraction, I think. At least that's my opinion.
Well, that's how it's always been presented to me. I'm in the exact same situation. To be honest, like, you don't want to say, oh, by the way, I'm married, you know, in your first
Can you help me out here?
interaction, yeah. But there are times, I mean, because there is casual conversation and it just kind of comes up that, you know, you might, and in some cases it's been a little uncomfortable. People kind of skirt away from the issue of like, oh, we're not supposed to talk to her about, you know, being married or whatever, and other times they address it openly. I did have an experience though where it kicked me in the butt because I didn't say anything. By the time I got offered the job and was in negotiating, I didn't find out until then that the university rarely does spousal accommodations. So it was really defeating in that sense. And so ever since then, I've wondered if it is more appropriate to say something a little bit earlier. So I don't know if that's a good answer to you, Eric, sorry, but it's an incredibly
Yeah, I mean, if it's like a
challenging thing to
potential
balance.
package deal, like if in those type, maybe that's a unique situation, but it sounds like like Paul, what you're saying, typically, it's probably a bad idea to mention that in the beginning.
Well, just the experiences that I've been involved with, that comes in a bit later
Yeah.
in the process if you're beginning to negotiate for that position.
Yeah, that's something.
Then that could come out as an important element of you deciding whether you're going to take the job or not. But I think the idea of asking in a somewhat innocent way whether the university typically supports spousal accommodation, that's not an unfair question to ask.
Okay.
And it's pretty typical now too, I mean, because that's what I was dealing with, is everybody here, I mean, the deans and associate deans and everybody over at WC are like, oh, well, we basically just, every time we hire someone now, we just assume we're bringing a spouse or, you know, a domestic partner of some sort, and we accommodate it, and it really was surprising to not have it. So yeah, you don't want to do it immediately, you do want to sell yourself and focus on that, but it is a major part of it. A lot of times in interviews, you get the personal conversations with someone, and a lot of times they'll say, ask me anything. This is just between us, and of course you have to have your filter on. But I think, you know, there are these times that are more appropriate to dig in a little bit on spousal accommodation and maybe some of those more personal things.
I think you just want to be careful on how you. We can't ask you those kinds of questions.
Yeah, of course.
We can't ask you, you know, are you married? You know, we can't ask those kinds of personal questions.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, let me answer that on the private side just
Sure,
to
yeah.
There are going to be a lot of questions that you would get that are probing personal life, which are prohibited. These guys are prohibited from doing it. Good businesses are going to do it one way or another because they're going to make a substantial investment in you and they want to know about the potential for you sticking around. And you don't have to answer those questions, but you would probably be at a disadvantage not to. And there was good advice here because if there is going to be accommodation, it's going to be because they want you. So you need to.
You need that leverage point.
Yeah.
They have to want something. They have to be like, we want that person.
Yeah.
And so.
And then that's the time that you can negotiate,
Yeah.
you know, special accommodations. On an aside, running a business here in Moscow, we love people like that.
Wait for one.
We pick up the
You get 2 for
spouses
1
that the
sometimes.
university doesn't.
Yeah.
Doesn't want, and they're advantageous for us. They don't have to pay for a move. There's, you can do it as an extended internship,
I think that's,
a professional internship,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. So it's a little bit different. I wanted to emphasize one point that you made, though. Double check, triple check, quadruple check everything you send. No typos. That immediately